Welcome. If you are new to this series, then I want to provide you with a content warning. The documentaries I choose often cover controversial, horrific, and sensitive topics. That being said, a trigger warning is on screen now, and viewer discretion is advised. The Man Who Knew Too Much was released onto YouTube in September of 2021 by the channel Independent POV. The documentary discusses the crucial 3-decade gap in Northern Ireland's fight for independence and unity. One half wanted to separate from the UK and join the Republic of Ireland, while the other half wanted to remain part of the UK. Republicans and Loyalists fought brutally, causing death and destruction in their own streets for their beliefs. Not wanting to lose the land, the UK would step in with their own assistance, underground psychological operations. The documentary would focus around one particular individual, Colin Wallace, who would be labeled as the forefront to what would become fake news today. Starting in the Ministry of Defense, he eventually found himself moving up ranks until he was working with clandestine operations, designed to create stories against the IRA, portraying them as communists and Satanists, using the fear of the Cold War and manipulating the newly growing evangelical movement against the IRA. All of his stories were fabricated with the slightest hair of truth residing within them, using that single line of truth as the whole story's credibility. Suddenly, one day, Colin Wallace decides to undermine the entire operation and becomes a whistleblower, resulting in him being investigated. Once investigated, it is quickly discovered that Wallace would be convicted as a murderer, with headlines claiming that he murdered his lover's husband. With this conviction, Wallace would immediately be sentenced to serve for manslaughter, where he spent 6 long years in prison. However, due to blowing the cover of the operation, Wallace found himself in the spotlight to be investigated by the others, including the public. And these further investigations would then discover that this murder story, the reason he's in prison, was completely false. With this, the charges against Wallace were dropped, freeing him from prison. But why did he all of a sudden become a whistleblower in the first place? Colin Wallace states that there were 2 big events in his career that he deemed as inexcusable. One event was when those who worked with Wallace demanded that he make a false story and smear campaign against their own prime minister. Wallace wholeheartedly was a patriotic individual and would do anything for his country and his rights. So, to suddenly turn around and smear his own democracy felt wrong. But the second event may hold much more weight. During his career, the authorities would discover an underground pedophile ring happening in the Concora boys' home, this home being operated by a loyalist group. The authorities would then instead silence the story from being released, fearing the potential risk of losing their propaganda war. Children were abused and assaulted in an operation fueled by a political party, and the authorities deemed their stories as too politically incorrect, and thus silenced them. These 2 events would cause Colin Wallace to abandon his position and to go tell the world the truth. All of the lies he told, all of the lies he was paid to write, all of the campaigns fabricated, everything. But when a man spends his life lying to the public and then turns against the government, there truly is no one by his side. Who can trust him after all of the harm he's done? What remains chilling, however, is that Wallace states that many of his tactics that he implemented back then are still being heavily used to this day. Originally documented in 2003, Cutting Edge is a multiple-episode series which follows the filmmaker Lee View as he travels back to his home in Romania. The reason for his return is disturbing, but simple.
I've returned to Romania because I've heard that child prostitution and sex trafficking have become a big problem.
A sudden rise and demand of trafficking children had begun. In order to get a deeper perspective, Lee View interviews his friend, a 15-year-old who has been sold into trafficking for 3 years now. It is learned that this teenager, Laurentiu, is now being sold to the West by a wealthy German tourist, and he states that he's going willingly, for poverty in Romania has reduced his attempt at living to becoming a child prostitute.
One.
The man has paid for Laurentiu to get himself a passport. He's promised to take him to Germany after Christmas.
The interview gets into grotesque detail of what these elites do to their victims. Next, Laurentiu shows Liviu the group of homeless teens that he associates with. And if you've seen my previous Darkest documentaries, then you may recognize the environment. Children begging for scraps, inhaling Oralac and factory glue, and fighting just to cope with their situation. All too similar to the previous documentary I covered, Children Underground. The kids discuss the rampant rise of pedophilic tourists who either purchase or steal kids and send them abroad, willingly selling your body as a child, abandoning your home and your friends because the pain of hunger and the state of your country can and will kill you. Throughout these episodes, there is a British tourist mentioned often who is infamously known for kidnapping and assaulting children. His name is Tom Peters, and Tom hosts a paywalled website where he's displayed images that he's taken, mentioning that those who are interested can, quote-unquote, meet the models in person. To do this, you just have to set up an interaction via email. Liviu sends an email disguising himself as a Western. Afterwards, Liviu goes to Italy after learning that that's where a lot of the larger elite rings operate. He hires a young girl and begins discussing everything that she knows, and discovers that the rumors are true. Young boys are being trafficked across Europe and into the United States. He secretly records himself pretending to be an Italian as he talks to a young boy. All of a sudden, the young boy's father shows up, only for us to find out that the father is the one prostituting his son. This results in a constant theme, as Liviu discovers that all of the boys being sold onto the streets are sold from their own families. Defeated, he returns home, only to find a response from Tom Peters. A meetup is scheduled, and Liviu uses a friend as a disguise, as Liviu isn't actually a Western. And here, we meet the runner of the underground website ring, Tom Peters. The friend holds his disguise very well, as they discuss Tom's boys and what they can do. It's harrowing hearing Tom talk about the boys as if they're just food, objects, products, pets, as if he isn't prostituting children but rather running some sort of art museum available for the elite.
So many fucking boys, I'm gonna find them all, Look at that. Tattoos, look, at that age, 16.
Now, where do you meet him?
I get aroused.
At one point, while talking about all of his clients, Tom mentions that one of his frequent clients is a top judge in Germany.
The other guy, he's a fucking judge. He's a what? A judge. Seriously? Yeah, a top judge. Surprising what you meet sometime.
In the end, Tom flees after everything they've been through, but it's too late. They already have him on camera, discussing his disturbing interests and crimes. They send in the information to the police, and the documentary ends. However, when I researched Tom Peters, it doesn't seem like anything came from this, with multiple sources claiming he was never even arrested and could still be partaking in this ring at large. This paper, in particular, discussing child exploitation, was written in 2010, 7 years after this documentary came out, and yet it too mentions that Tom Peters, quote-unquote, remains at large. Directed by Penny Woolcock, the film The Wet House focuses around a building that shelters the homeless and caters to their daily alcohol dependency. For 70 minutes, you are left to witness abandoned family members, addicts, and the disabled stumble around, drunkenly yelling incoherent sentences. They break into songs, they dance, they scream, they fight, they sob, and they're drunk, from sunrise to sunset. Penny lets the film mostly tell the story itself. There is no plot. There is no redemption. These are simply victims of their own addiction, given one final opportunity of warmth and shelter. Penny theorizes that the point behind the wet house is to give these homeless people their own deathbeds, realizing that they're going to drink themselves to death despite their location. So, in the end, at least they will pass in a bed, surrounded by others, rather than in the streets, alone. The wet house does offer a detoxification course, but the individual has to prove that they're capable of going through the process. Penny would go on to write a blog about her experiences with documenting the wet house, and I do suggest you read it, as there are some heavy-hitting remarks that she makes. She discusses how many of the men are post-war veterans, left to handle their PTSD in a society that didn't even blink an eye towards veterans' mental health. She lists off many, mostly tragic experiences, but the heaviest section is, "I loved my 2 months at the wet house, and I formed close relationships. Michael Chandler was a lovely man. His story is in the film, so I won't tell it here, but he was haunted by a set of photographs." For some context, although it's rather difficult to make out what Michael is saying in his interview due to being intoxicated, he tells a story of how he killed a man who took him prisoner in war. He keeps repeating himself that he had to do it, that he had to kill the man, as if seeking validation from others, from us, from society. Finally, the man dies, and Michael looks through the man's pockets in hopes to find any maps or perhaps intel, but instead, he finds a wallet full of family photos, realizing that this was just another father and husband who will not be returning home. Jamie Blue, the glue sniffer, was destroyed by her habit, but there was a sweetness about her that was irresistible. Uncle Tony, the Brickie, Belfast Tommy, and Car Park George all live on inside me and in the film. They are all dead now. We left Annette on a higher note, sober and shiny, but years later, I was told that when she watched the film, she fell off the wagon, went back to the booze, and died. I had made a special extra filming trip to film Annette, clean, when the film was almost edited, so she could be proud of seeing the change that she had achieved. If it was the film that destroyed her, what was it about seeing herself as chaotic as she had been that drew her back? There is a stone in my heart, and Annette is dead. I don't know. I thought I had been careful and fair. It goes without saying that the documentary attempts to end on a positive note, but as we already know, due to Penny's blog, this positive note is only temporary, with Annette recovering to falling back to old habits and losing her life. It seems Penny doesn't know whether or not to accept blame or guilt for showing this side of addiction, but I guess that's the ugly truth in the end. Thank you all for watching. Please, have a safe winter, and I hope I'll see you all in 2024.